Hello, and welcome to my channel. My name is Jonathan Cohn, and today I'll be providing my September 2024 reading review. In my reading review videos, I go through how many books I read each month and talk about what I read and what was my least favorite, what was my favorite, talk about my book of the month type thing. And I read some darn good books this month, and I read some okay books. The way it broke down was I have one book that would be like if we're talking about out of 5 stars, which is the traditional way of reviewing. In my videos I say out of 10, but if we're saying out of 5 stars, I had one book that was a 3-star book, and then I had 7 books that were 4-star books. So I had a lot of good books, and then I had 5 books that were 5 stars this month, which is an excellent month of reading. Usually there's more 3 stars. So there's only one 3-star this month, and that was Halo the Flood by William C. Dietz. This was the worst book of the month that I read. I don't think it's a bad book. I just think it's a non-entertaining book, which is worse than a bad book. A bad book that's entertaining, like you recognize it's not a good book, but hey, I had fun with it, is better than a book that I think it's well constructed. I just didn't enjoy it at all. That's how I feel about this book. I think that there's some cool elements to it, but as a whole, it just was not an entertaining read for me. And I do have a full review of all of these books. Either it's already come out or the full review will be coming out soon. So that is the lowest of the month. But getting into the 4-star reads, the ones that I actually enjoyed, we have Star Trek: The Lost Era: Catalyst of Sorrows. This is the final Lost Era book. I'm reading this as part of the Literary Treks podcast series. I do the Literary Treks podcast with Casey Pettit, and our producer is Matt Rushing, and we've been going through this series, and we're finished up with the Lost Era, and I enjoyed this one, not quite as much as the previous Lost Era, but it has some great stuff with Uhura and Sisko, and it's got some great stuff with Tuvok. It's a really good book, really entertaining. It's not my favorite in the series, but it was an entertaining book. Speaking of entertaining Star Trek book, the other Star Trek book I read this month is a new release, although not exactly. And that is Star Trek Picard: No Man's Land by Kirsten Beyer and Mike Johnson. This is a audio drama that they turned into the script format, and just like the Star Wars books have done, this is the first such for Star Trek. It is 150 pages. I read it in about an hour. It is a quick read, and I enjoyed it, but I felt it should have been longer for the price point. All right. Next, I have a Star Wars book that I really enjoyed, also a 4 out of 5 stars, and that was Star Wars: Beware the Nameless by Zoraida Cordova, the middle grade High Republic book that came out recently. And I really enjoyed this. I loved Churro the Hutt in this book. I loved how we're getting more expansion with the younglings like Kildo, and Gavin really wasn't in this book much. And then we have Tep Tep, and we also have other Jedi characters in this book. And it was a delightful read. It had a really good plot, and I think that Zoraida did a really good job with this, and I hope to see her write more, because I think she's nailed every book she's done for Star Wars. Next, I read a John Grisham book this month. It's not a legal thriller. It's, I don't know how to categorize it, just a contemporary novel titled Playing for Pizza. It's really short. I read it in like a single evening. It is a really fun read about it's basically about a football player who, flames out in America, and he goes and he plays football in Italy, where he's a huge star. And it's an entertaining read. It's not amazing, but it was an entertaining read for a single day. My next 4-star read was Salvage Title by Kevin Steverson. This is the start of the Salvage Title universe. This is a really expansive, there's been 20 or 30 books in this series already. There's more to come. This is a very fun, light, short science fiction novel. It's got military science fiction. It's got mech science fiction. It's really light and fun. And if you want a light, fun read, this is an excellent light, fun read. And that's why I gave it also 4 stars. I also read the Star Wars book True Colors, which I was shocked that I loved this book. It's been 5 years since I read one of the Republic Commando books, and I picked it up. This is the 3rd one, and I was surprised that it just picked up so easily for me, and I had a blast, and I'm going to read more in October and November. I'm really excited to keep on with this series. And then the final 4-star book was a book that I was actually had lower expectations for, and it actually it really surprised me. And that was the High Republic book, Tears of the Nameless, which is the new YA book by George Mann. Just came out as I'm recording this video this last week. And this was such an entertaining book. This is a YA book tailor-made for my interests in YA. If you're going to make a YA book that works for me, this is the type of book that's going to work for me. And I think that George Mann, he just has a style of writing that I really like for Star Wars. And so that is the best of the 4 stars. So now we're getting into the 5-star reads, and these are truly some of the great books I read this year. And it was hard to order these. I know what the best book of the month is, but the other 4, they are all kind of in the same range. So really the next 4 could go in pretty much any order. But I'm going to start talking about Fablehaven, Grip of the Shadow Plague. This is another great addition to the Fablehaven series. 5 out of 5 stars, really good. Every book in the series has been this way. This book both changes it up while also still keeping some of the touchstones of the style that we love in the series. And I just think Brandon Mull gets how to write kids' books. And I wish that I had known about this book series when I was a kid, because I think I would have really enjoyed it. And I think it would have gotten me reading even earlier in life. But I loved this book. I also read a Dresden Files book titled Deadbeat, which I loved this book. It was so entertaining, one of my favorites in the series. Not quite as much as book 3 and book 5. I know it's Grave Peril, and I think book 5 also starts with a D, Death Masks. Not quite as good as those, but like still a solid book. And I loved the character of Butters. Polka Never Dies. I loved the story in this book. I loved the zombies. I loved so much of this. So this was another 5 out of 5 stars. I also read a science fiction book by Ben Bobo, who he just pretty much does nothing but home runs so far, and that was Leviathans of Jupiter. He's only had one book that was just okay. Everything else has been amazing. And this was even better than the first Jupiter book, which I loved. And this book it's just the science fiction and exploration and world building. I love everything about Ben Bova's writing. If I made my TBR only Ben Bova books, I think I would just eat it up. I would love it still, because he has that many books, and I love his writing that much. All right. I also read Monster Hunter Fever, Memoirs Fever. This is one of the memoirs books. This is by Larry Correia and Jason Cordova. I've enjoyed the first 2 Monster Hunter International books, but I decided to read a shorter one this month, and so I read the memoirs one, which I had in hardcover, and I was shocked by how much I loved this book. I loved this book so much, and I am just clamoring. I'm begging Jason to make a sequel, because it was so good. And I want more with these characters, and I think that Jason and Larry write well together. I think that they have a good balance between them, and so I loved this book. I had such a good time reading it. And so that was another great book. But sadly for these 4 books, any of these could have been a book of the month, because they were that good. But they're all playing for second to this next book. And so I'm sorry if you're a writer who wrote any of those, no disrespect. But the book of the month has to easily go to The Judas Blossom. This was a superb. It is a historical fiction that identifies as a fantasy. It has fantasy elements in it, but they're tiny. It's a really soft magic system, and it's really minuscule fantasy elements. Almost the entire book is historical fiction about the Mongolian Empire, set, well after the time of Genghis Khan. And it's about Hulagu Khan and Temujin Khan and all these other great Khans. And it's an amazing read. It is history come to life. And, of course, he fudges a little bit of the storyline, but Stephen Arion just did an amazing job. This is a top-tier book of the year for me, potentially. This is like up neck and neck with my favorite fantasy read of the year. This is a truly, truly amazing book. And I just can't believe that this got published, and it's so good. The cover, I don't love the cover, but the book is so good. And I already have the Blood Dimmed Tide. That's hard to say, Blood Dimmed Tide. I have that book on my wish list for birthday and Christmas, because I really want to continue on with this series. So I loved The Judas Blossom, and of all the books, this is easily book of the month. I loved it. So those are all of the 13 books I read in September. I had a few books that would be categorized as tomes because they were over 500 pages. These two books, that book was over 500 pages. So it wasn't, but they all like barely met it. They were like 510, 520 pages. None of them were like, 1,000-page books this month. I do have some long books coming in November and December. But 13 books, pretty good. Pretty good. I had one book that I started the day before the end of the month and just couldn't finish it in time, so that'll go into October's reading review. So maybe October will be larger than normal because it has an extra book in there. But that is what I read in September. If you've read any of these books, let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. What was your book of the month? What do you think of mine? And until next time, I'm Jonathan, and thank you for watching.